don't talk about the sources. And so when we were gathering last time, we were looking at the first source. If I sit down, can you see? Are we good?
Yes.
I'll turn this a little bit and then those will be able to see. So the second source is what we're going to be looking at today. And we're wondering why all these sources are. And I have to get my system functioning again. Yeah. So the first one was the direct experience of the transcending mystery, right? Wait, there it doesn't have to be. Okay. These are my notes. I will show you when you're ready. So, or when I'm ready.
Of the light?
The light's off. The light's up there off.
We need that one. Jeff, can you reach that? Thank you, love. So what we're going to do today is the second one. Okay? The second one is acknowledging that we draw not only on our inner experience, the transcendent experience, but we also draw on the prophetic words of other beings who have been able to express that. Now, prophecy is an interesting word. It's part of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. It's one of the many gifts. And, I need the lights on because I can't see them. There we go. Excellent. Now you'll be able to see that, and I'll be able to see you in all as well. So, prophecy is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit laid out in the New Testament, and it's very much present in the Old Testament, and it's the prophetic experience is part of the religious experience, the spiritual experience in virtually every culture, but it isn't what we have been taught it is. We have been taught that prophecy is telling you the future. No, prophecy is speaking divine words. Prophecy is allowing that greater wisdom to flow through us and be spoken. And sometimes those words are, if you continue on this path, these are the consequences. Not, I will do it to you, but that's just what happens. Right? So when that is said, that's how it got slipped into the idea of this is what is going to happen. So we're looking at the second source then, the words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, there we go, and the transforming power of love. Now you should be able to get it. So with this second principle, we're being challenged not just to go inside, but to bring the inside into the world, to respond to the world from the inside. And for many, many UU ministers, this is the essence of the ministry, individually and collectively, to be responding to what seems to be going on in the world that is not in alignment with the inherent worth and dignity of every being, from this place of justice, equity, and compassion. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So first I want to look at this idea of compassion. What is compassion? This is from a UU reverend whose name is Kit, and she has a website she calls Miss Kitty's Saloon. Which I thought was very serendipitous because when I walk without this thing, I look a lot like Festus. So, compassion, a profound emotion prompted by the pain of others and a desire not to cause further pain, but to alleviate that pain, their pain, if possible. So there's a certain amount of empathy involved in compassion. Now, I grew up in a world of social workers, and compassion was often, compassion and pity were somehow, we're up here and we can help you down there. And so when I discovered the Buddhist interest in compassion, I was a little concerned because I did not want to be up here helping those down there, right? I wanted it to be mutual, and that's part of what I like about Kit's notion of what compassion is here. And then she says it's at the root of human efforts to reach out to those in pain. That's not about looking down, is it? It's just going, wow, you're struggling. How can I be there with you and for you? It tempers the stringencies of justice and equity. Compassion. There's a wonderful line in The Hobbit where, actually it's in the first book of the Rings trilogy, where Frodo is complaining to Gandalf because Bilbo did not kill Gollum. Frodo, okay, the story is that the hobbits are little guys, and Gandalf, a great wizard, has called them forth. And in the book The Hobbit, he's called Bilbo forth to go on a quest with the dwarves. The dwarves are trying to reclaim their treasure. And along the way, Bilbo has met a former human being, possibly even a former hobbit, who has been so degraded by lust and greed that it's more like a little monster now, okay? And this being has been tricking and making life difficult for all kinds of beings all along the way. But Bilbo encounters him and does not harm him. Frodo has to work with Gollum, this being that is now more like a monster than a human being. And he is very upset that Bilbo didn't kill him because he has to work with him now as a result. Gandalf's response was, mercy is essential when justice is being considered. Yes, it would have been a just response to some of the things that Gollum had done, but without mercy, there was no life here. And mercy, Gandalf is saying, is what we're calling compassion. Just a little something there. And compassion, she says, Kit says, is the source of the golden rule. And the golden rule is one of those things, and I'm sure you've seen it, there's the version in Christianity, the version in Judaism, and the version in Confucianism, and the version in Buddhism, and and they're all slight variations, but basically it is, do with those around you that which you would hope they would do with and for you, and nothing else. No more, no less, right? And that comes out of compassion. George Washington Carver basically says if you don't have compassion, you're not going to get very far in life, mainly because you're going to be every one of the things that you are not having compassion for or having compassion for now. One of the things that's happened to me as this injury has been taking its time to finally get well is all the things that I find that I now have a deeper compassion for in other people's experience. It wasn't that I didn't feel and wasn't trying to be helpful before, but now I really get it. Oh, there's that funny thing again. I have no idea what that is. So the other one here is the Dalai Lama being a good Buddhist, the ultimate Buddhist in the Tibetan tradition. And he basically says if you want to be happy, have compassion. What an interesting notion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And here's one understanding of that. If we are compassionate with ourselves and with those around us, then we are doing that which is most fully in alignment with who we are, and we are supporting ourselves in that. Okay? Having compassion. So she says, this is another, this is different. This is Gretchen Woods, another UU minister who I often quote. We need to be aware that we can enjoy the process of working with the principle, this second principle, if we are willing to choose our causes wisely with an eye to our own best skills and talents. This goes in line with the teaching that a lot of you have heard me repeat several times, and that is, do that which is effortless, enjoyable, and energizing. Nothing more, nothing less. When we choose that which is enjoyable and energizing, that which it takes no effort to make us do, we are being compassionate with ourselves, and ultimately we're far more effective than we would be otherwise. And that's one of the things that we get to learn in this process. I was asked to do this focus when the programs committee, when I met with the programs committee, it was the last one Bob and Peg got to attend, and it was a very wonderful meeting. And there was a real concern because that was the week of the Dallas shootings. And how do we have compassion for ourselves and for everyone else in situations like that? We're being told by the media that the world is a very violent place and there's lots of acts of violence going on and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And we get troubled by that. And yet, in order for us to be effective, we have to find a way to get back to that being compassionate with ourselves and everyone else. So we need a perspective that allows us to do that. And one of the first things we need to do is to separate story and hype and drama from actual experience. Right? And then whatever we are experiencing, we need to allow the feelings. That's another way to be compassionate with ourselves and with those around us. Allow people to express and have their feelings safely. They don't need to yell at us. And we don't need to yell at them. But allowing our feelings, not just bottling them up. And when we have done that, we can begin to realize the truth of our own personal being and of all beings. This is namaste. The divinity that I am honors the divinity that you are. The divinity that is flowing through and supporting and helping us. That's the essential truth of all these situations. And when we can focus on that, it begins to become our experience. So I want to walk through this process, starting with looking at what's really going on in the world. Violence is decreasing in this world. There is not an increase in violence. And I'm going to give you some numbers and tables and graphs. Okay, this is a summary of that. Here's what it looks like. There was an increase with the Iraq War and Afghanistan invasion, okay, in the 90s. But it's been decreasing ever since. The number of battle deaths since 1946, this is 46 to 2014, look at that. Violence is decreasing in the world. We may have wars happening, but people are not dying from it. Violence in the U.S. is decreasing. The FBI says down by 4 to 12 to 15% on an annual basis, and here's what it looks like on a graph. It's not increasing. The world is not falling apart. Right? So when the media focuses on various acts of violence, they're having to work harder to do it. It isn't happening everywhere. When I was growing up in a third-floor walk-up apartment in Chicago, on the border between the University of Chicago over here, and behind me, the ghetto. So literally, the other side of my alley was the ghetto. And there were times when the beat cop walked home on the opposite side of the street so that I'd get home safely from my piano lessons or from school. And one evening, there was a ruckus outside, and I looked down, and there was a man in the street chasing another man, and they were shooting each other. Now, fortunately, I was 12. I wasn't 5. I think it would have had a very different impact on me. That was my neighborhood. I went back to that neighborhood a few years ago because a woman that I got to know in Portland now lives in my old neighborhood. And I got there and I parked my car and I got out of the car and I walked up to her building and I rang the doorbell and I went up to her apartment and she said, "Do you know what this neighborhood is?" She happens to be a black Muslim named Shah. And I said, "Yeah, I grew up here." And that blew her away. Right? Her neighborhood is so violent that it was not okay in her mind for me to park my car on the street and get out of it and walk up to her building. The neighborhood I lived in Portland was another violent neighborhood. It's near Emmanuel Hospital. And around the corner, on the other side of the block, again on the other side of the block, were all kinds of things, drive-by shootings, all kinds of nasty things going on. Our block, nothing ever happened on. There's a reason for that. This is what's going on in the U.S. in terms of violent deaths. Homicides have been kind of stable at around 11,000. Terrorist deaths, well, there aren't any. The only violence that has been increasing, and I believe it is directly a result of the media attention, is mass shootings. In fact, so far in the U.S. today, there have been 239 mass shootings this year. The day of the Orlando event, there were 28 others. How come we didn't hear about them? All right? The media is trying to create an image of who we are and what we are that is not necessarily accurate. Okay? My friend who lives in the neighborhood I grew up in doesn't understand that her story about her neighborhood is what she's experiencing. Our story is what the media hands us. The truth is, violence is on the decrease. And they're having to work real hard, and these are the only things that we will focus on. So, just for the folks who are getting at you and saying we all need to be armed to reduce these shootings, 3% of all of these in the last 5-10 years have been handled by armed citizens. I love that 13% were handled by unarmed citizens. Right? And in close to half the cases, 40% of these mass shootings, the shooter then commits suicide, and it's done. What is that about? How can we have compassion? I was going to try to have this set up a little bit ahead of time. We were going to have to wait while this gets prepared. One of the things that Peg asked us to do, asked me to do for this program, was to share, if I can, the words of President Obama at the memorial address, the memorial service for that event.
The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from
Sorry
the nation's
about
capital.
that. That's
and our
never
public
happened
service and your
before.
television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let me get this up to where it's supposed to be. I had it set up.
Another community torn apart. More hearts broken. More questions about what caused and what might prevent another such thing. I know that Americans are struggling right now with what we've witnessed over the past week. First, the shootings in Minnesota and Denver, the protesters. Then the targeting of police by the shooter here. An act not just of demented violence, but of racial hatred. All of it's left us wounded and angry and hurt. The deepest fault lines of our democracy have suddenly been exposed, perhaps even widened. And although we know that such divisions are not new, though they've surely been worse in even the recent past, that offers us little comfort. Faced with this violence, we wonder if the divides of race in America can ever be bridged. We wonder if an African-American community that feels feels unfairly targeted by police, and police departments that feel unfairly maligned for doing their jobs, can never understand each other's experience. We turn on the TV, or surf the internet, we can watch positions hardened and lines drawn. People retreat to their respective corners. Politicians calculate how to grab attention or avoid the fallout. We see all this, and it's hard not to think sometimes that the center won't hold, and that things might get worse. I understand. I understand how Americans are feeling. But Dallas, I'm here to say we must reject such despair. I'm here to insist that we are not as divided as we seem. And I know that because I know America. I know how far we've come against impossible odds. I know we'll make it because of what I've experienced in my own life. What I've seen of this country and its people, their goodness and decency as President of the United States. And I know it because of what we've seen here in Dallas. How all of you, out of great suffering, have shown us the meaning of perseverance and character. Hope. When the bullets started flying, the men and women of the Dallas police, they did not flinch, and they did not react recklessly. They showed incredible restraint. Helped in some cases by protesters, they evacuated the injured, isolated the shooter, saved more lives than we will ever know. We mourn fewer people today because of your brave actions. Everyone was helping each other, one witness said. It wasn't about black or white. Everyone was picking each other up, moving them away. See, that's the America I know. The police helped Shatamia Taylor as she was
That's the America I know. That's the essence of that. When we allow ourselves to get caught in the story, we're not able to function effectively. How can we be effective, and how can we be compassionate? And how can we be aware that these things that are going on around us don't have to be how it is? Did you notice over and over again, he kept going back to, they're trying to make us feel this, but this is what's really happening. You know, we're being encouraged to experience this, but this is what's really happening. We need to be aware of that. I happened to pick up the current issue of the magazine that used to be called Shambhala's Sun and is now called Lion's Roar. Buddhist magazine in America. And a guy named Greg Snyder, not Barry Snyder, Greg Snyder, wrote an article on guns in America. And he pointed out that the words that are used by people when they are doing these things, he calls them the shooter, invariably are demonstrations of anger and humiliation. He said they betrayed the anger and humiliation, feelings he could not endure So he used a pistol to unload them. Or an AK-14 or whatever. He used this thing to unload them. And he went on to say, it's not too surprising that he would use a pistol or any other form of gun, because in America, a gun is the most potent symbol for being free. Right? He says, American myth, media, and entertainment hold up guns as the ultimate punctuation mark of all manifest destiny and revenge tales. The ultimate punctuation. This is why guns are on the increase in our country. Why that's one of the reasons. I have another theory, and that is we're reducing the number of wars, and the gun merchants need more places to sell their guns, frankly. And so they create some kind of a scare around guns, and so Americans run and buy more guns. And the other one is the electronics are moving so quickly that you can't collect electronics anymore, so you collect guns. But apart from that, it really is. It's the symbol of I am a free man and I can have my life the way I want it. And the people who are feeling totally outside of the limits of normal society, for whatever reason, reach for them. And yet, we have someone like Martin Luther King who lived at that edge, who lived in a world where violence against his family and his people was normal. Not in his particular life. His father was a Baptist minister in a ghetto in Atlanta. But around him, he nonetheless understood that reaching for the gun was not going to bring about the changes people were looking for. It never brings peace. It leads to a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. And that was why he chose the nonviolent path. And yet, in our culture, more and more people are being dominated and humiliated, and so they reach for the gun. Okay? The same Greg Snyder in the Buddhist magazine. We cannot ignore the logic of patriarchy, white supremacy, and I'm going to say corporate capitalism. What these three ideologies share is an agreement that bodies, whether female, brown and black, or labor, are material to be exploited and dominated. Through these frames, these three ideologies, the world is divided into those who are entitled to dominate and those who are humiliated by domination. Okay? So we live in a culture that on the one hand says you either get to dominate or be humiliated. Not every aspect of the culture, and thank heaven there are groups like this where that's not true. But in those ideologies, that is the case. And at the same time, we're saying if you're getting too humiliated, that's what a gun is for, to show that you can solve the problem. That's Greg Snyder's evaluation. Martin Luther King didn't buy the gun as the response. He says, even if you are feeling humiliated, don't act. More, don't hate. Even if you have been separated from the norm, even if you've reached the glass ceiling for your color, your gender, your choice of lifestyle, don't hate. And he got that from a teacher, a number of teachers, including Gandhi. But Barbara Deming comes in and says, the way to get through that is to abolish that power structure in which domination and humiliation are all that are left. And she says we need to redefine power as something that is common to all, to be used by all and for all. So we begin to make this shift when we not only give up being attached to the story that the media has been handing us, and we give up the attachment to the story of the domination and humiliation, which we have been unconsciously, subconsciously living with all of our lives, but we begin to recognize that power is something we all share and can share, and then that gets us into that realization of the interconnected web of life. See, when the Unitarian Universalist General Assemblies created our principles and explicated our sources, what they did was give us a formula for living in a changing world in which domination and violence has been the norm that no longer needs to be. And compassion comes in part, I love the word, com, meaning from the Latin com, meaning with, and passion, feeling with. We are interconnected. We can lean on each other. J. Krishnamurti said, let's go even one step further. By identifying ourselves as separate beings, as separate people, as separate nationalities, as separate religious groups, we are actually committing an act of violence. Compassion, the with feeling, is eliminated as soon as I say, I'm a UU, I'm not a. Okay? One of the UU ministers that I was reading as I was going through, I think it was Gretchen Wood, said, do we have the courage to allow those that we have been, who are in religious groups we've been prejudiced against, come into our Unitarian congregation? So when we accept that we're all part of the interdependent web and we can lean on each other, then we can provide a support for each other, regardless of what the story has been, regardless of what we have thought about what divides us, regardless of whether domination and humiliation has been happening, regardless of whether violence has been happening. When we recognize that interdependence, and we can act in ways that are totally nonviolent. Women in black standing for peace around the world, and a couple of those are in Israel. That's where it started, in the Gaza Strip. And then their Argentinian friends connected with them, and then the Italian friends connected with them, and then the Americans connected with them. And it is a worldwide movement of non-confrontational presence, holding peace, ignoring the boundaries. So, the other piece of it is, though, remember the threes include enjoyable. How can we need to find that place where even though we've had so many triggers and hooks around the violence, around the prejudices, around the domination, around the humiliation, still we find a path that we enjoy. We are compassionate with ourselves that allows us to take one action. One thing. This is again Miss Kitty's saloon. What would happen if each of us said, wow, I'm ready to let go of that story. I'm ready to let go of that idea of how the world works. And I'm ready to do one thing in alignment with that. There's a group in Oregon that call themselves Oregon Voices for Justice. It's a UU group. It's a group of people all over the state. And they are working with policymakers. They say we think homelessness is a policy issue. We think economic injustice is a policy issue. So congregations doing justice together is their mission. It was a few people saying, I can do one thing. I can meet with this group of people. So ultimately, we get to be the change. We choose to move with love by recognizing the truth of the interconnected web that we're a part of. By recognizing the truth that whatever someone out there is trying to do, it's not going to have to affect me. I can make the changes in me, in my community, in my fellowship, in my family, by being the compassion and the love myself. So what happens is our gold medal winning American gymnastic team is Asian, Hispanic, African American, and very Caucasian. Being the change. Again, those of you who were here when I talked about Gandhi, this is what Satyagraha is. in the face of apparent evil, see the divinity and act on the basis of that divinity. Be it and see it. And that's how the world is changed. But he points out in that last quote, there must be no impatience, no barbarity, no insolence, no undue pressure. I'm not trying to convert you. I'm not trying to make whoever this is be different. I'm being with them. I'm feeling with them. I'm walking with them on the road. If you've ever seen negotiators working with violent people, you see that that's their approach. Let's walk through this together. American elder wisdom. Be tolerant of those who are lost on their path. Ignorance, conceit, anger, jealousy, and greed stem from a lost soul. Pray that they will find guidance. Pray that we will find good guidance so that we can be with them on the journey. We can't afford intolerance. A true democracy emerges out of that. So what's going on? We have the part of our mind-body system that was trained by the American culture, the empire culture, to say the ego, the intellect, what we tell you is so, is what is so. And then we have the part of our mind-body system that is what we brought with us into this world, or what brought us into this world, that we call the soul. The false self was created by the culture. The true self was the soul. The false self has all those qualities that we consider normal. The true self has all those qualities we strive to become. There's a wonderful meme that I didn't put on here. I love it. It's, what if I told you that instead of having to work so hard to be all those things you wish you could be, you simply relaxed and recognized you are. You can simply relax and recognize you are. So what's happening when we get into this, the fear in the media and all of that aspect of life that is, trying to be in our face, it's our ego self, it's that part of us that was trained to think a certain way, taking over our life and being reflected back at us. So every time we get caught up in feelings, I've been known to say, if it doesn't feel heavenly, there's something I need to release. Because all I have to do is relax into what we already are. So there's something that I'm hanging on to that isn't who we are, that is showing up as this. If I can have compassion with myself and with everyone else, then I recognize that every moment is here to help me experience. And when it says grow, what it really means, help you relax into who you truly are. So, remember this fundamental truth. And recognize that this is what's going on in the war zone in the Middle East. There are far more actions like this than and all the things that the media tells us about. This is what's going on in our urban environments. This is what's going on in the animal kingdom. It is not red in tooth and claw. And this is what is happening everywhere in the world. More and more people from different cultures, different races, different religions, working together, enjoying being together. This bottom picture is happening on the Gaza Strip every single day. The world we are experiencing today is the result of our collective consciousness, and if we want a new world, each of us must start taking responsibility for helping create it. And where do we do that? Right here. We go back to the truth of our being, and acting on that truth rather than on that data, those facts, those stories that we have been told. That's